Hello, my name is Tejlan Pettinger from Economics Help, and today I'd like to look at the pros and cons of immigration. So just to summarise quickly at first, the main benefits of immigration can be fill job vacancies, create a more flexible labour market, help to increase economic growth. If workers are of working age, then it leads to a net contribution to the government budget. However, downsides of immigration can include it may push down wages for the low-skilled workers. It could put pressure on public services like housing and education and doctors' surgeries. So first of all, countries often encourage immigration when they have labour shortages. So after the Second World War, places like America and the UK were actually quite keen to encourage immigration to fill low-skilled jobs in factories and driving buses. And so this helped to maintain the strong economic growth of the post-war period because the economy could easily absorb these extra workers. Now sometimes people fear that immigrants may push down wages or even cause unemployment, the old trope that immigrants take your job. But when the economy is growing, this doesn't happen because although immigration increases the supply of labour, we have to bear in mind there's another effect, that as well as increasing the supply of labour, immigrants will also increase the demand for labour because immigrants have more income, so they spend in the economy, more demand for goods and services. So if we just look at the supply, then that might seem like wages go down. But when we take into account the supply and demand of immigrants, then unemployment will not be caused and wages may stay the same or even go up. And if you look at certain periods in the world economy, like America in the start of the 20th century, this is a period of very high immigration, but real wages are rising. They're rising for many factors, but it does show that immigration can be compatible with rising wages. And in the post-war period, again, you have large-scale immigration in America and the UK, but real wages continue to rise. Now that doesn't mean that immigration will always cause higher real wages. So, in the post-financial crisis of 2009 to 2016, one of the factors behind Brexit was that many workers were seeing real wages were quite stagnant. So this was a period of quite high immigration from Europe, but at the same time, real wages were fairly stagnant. Now they were stagnant for quite a lot of reasons. Weak economic recovery, weak bargaining position of workers, powerful monopoly firms. But you can understand that when wages are stagnant and you've got high levels of immigration, it's easier to argue that immigrants may be keeping wages down. Now there are many studies about the effect of immigration on wages, and as you might expect, they often give conflicting summaries. And the most reliable ones that I've read often say the effect on wages is really fairly limited. It neither pushes up wages or pushes wages down. One Bank of England study said there's a very small downward effect for the low-skilled workers. The skilled workers are really unaffected by immigration, but there is evidence that the unskilled did see a marginal downward pressure on wages through large-scale immigration. Now another important aspect of immigration is that often immigration is of fairly young adults, people who want to make a fresh start, get a job in a new country. They tend to be of fairly young age. And this actually has a benefit for the country where they're immigrating to, in that young workers will pay quite high taxes and receive relatively little in form of government spending because they don't receive pensions, they don't receive so much healthcare. So they're a net contributor to the tax revenue. And quite a few studies showed that the net migration from Europe actually benefited the UK exchequer because the young people were contributing financially. Now the flip side to that is that immigration can actually be damaging for the countries where workers leave, because some Eastern European countries kind of lose out if all their best, most entrepreneurial people go and work elsewhere, because it can leave them with an aging population, lower tax bases, and they're losing their most skilled and dynamic workers. There is some degree of remittances where immigrants send money back to their country of origin, but overall immigration is often a negative for countries who have very large outflow. Now, another factor to bear in mind is it depends on the age profile of immigrants. So, for example, immigration from a Commonwealth to the UK it's a different profile, because often it's relatives of young people, and so they may be older. You bring over your grandparents and great uncles, and so there the benefit of immigration is in a sense less, because they don't have that net contribution to the exchequer if they're over 65. Another feature of immigration is that it can make labour markets more flexible, because immigrants would tend to come if they have a reasonable chance of a job. So they may be attracted to jobs where it's hard to fill because native workers don't want to do it. And in the UK and other Western European countries, it's often hard to get workers to work picking fruit and vegetables on farms, packing meat in cold factories, and other fairly low-skilled jobs like, say, a cleaner or care worker or even a nurse. So immigration can fill in these gaps. And what we're seeing in many Western countries is we're having a declining birth rate. We're getting an aging population. And so over the next few decades, the ratio of retired people to young people is going to grow. There'll be a relative shortage of young workers. So in this climate, immigration may become more attractive, because we need young people to fill in these job vacancies and actually work, rather than have a population that is primarily of retired people. Now, one potential problem of immigration is that if you get a large number of people entering an economy, and often immigration tends to be localized in certain areas, because immigrants, for understandable reasons, want to live amongst other immigrants for a sense of community. But this means that certain towns and regions can have a big surge in their population, and this can put pressure on public services, on hospitals, on schools, on housing, can push up rents. And so those who are living in these areas which see large-scale immigration feel like they are losing out, because they're getting the same level of services but for more people. So they have longer waiting lists, more congestion, higher house prices. Now, in theory, immigration will increase real GDP because there's more people, bigger economy. And so the government should get more tax revenue, but it could spend on improving public services and housing in these areas. But often that doesn't happen, because there's a time delay, the government has poor information, or the government is unable or unwilling to spend sufficient money. So at least in the short term, you can get a lot of frustration at high levels of immigration, because the people in the seaside towns in the southeast or wherever feel like they are losing out. Now, to some extent, this could be mitigated if the government improved public services and improved housing, but often that doesn't happen for various reasons. Another issue with regard to immigration is that does it cause improved living standards for those who live there? And as we've said, that it just leads to a bigger economy, and so wages may well rise. But it is important to look at real GDP per capita, because you could have immigration causing a rise in real GDP of 10%, but if the population has increased by 10%, then the average incomes stay the same. Does immigration cause unemployment? Do migrants take your job because they're willing to work for lower wages? I would argue that this is a fairly weak argument, because it's the same principles with wages, but immigrants, yes, they increase the supply of labour, but also they increase the demand. And also immigrants are quite sensitive to the state of the economy. So in a boom, immigration increases, people want to go and work there. In a recession, when there's a downturn and more unemployment, immigrants often go back to the country they came from because there's less job opportunities. So for example, in the Irish economic downturn of 2009, there was a big outflow of construction workers back to Poland and Eastern Europe because the jobs dried up. So this actually makes the economy more flexible. In a boom time, you can get this increase in labour, but when there's a downturn, immigrants leave, therefore muting the rise in unemployment. There are some issues beyond economics. For example, even if real GDP per capita increases from immigration, you may feel that it's just too high population density. You have some countries in Europe with quite high population densities, and there's a conflict between building more houses and losing greenbelt land. There's a lot of congestion on the roads. So people may not want immigration simply because they feel their country is already quite busy. Now this is very much a normative judgment beyond economics, and that doesn't really enter into the economic issue. But we have to bear in mind that there are these cultural sensitivities and different opinions about what's important. It's not all about real GDP. We have to take into account other factors. But it is worth bearing in mind that another big benefit of immigration is it increases the gene pool, it increases the brain talent. So in America, you have a lot of famous scientists and entrepreneurs who are immigrants. Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, to name but a few. So America benefited from the intellectual capacity of immigrants, leading to scientific breakthroughs or new business. And it may well also be sporting benefits. Immigrants may bring in sporting skills and help to increase the medal tally at the Olympics and things like that. So the pros and cons of immigration is a tricky issue because there's a lot of politics behind it, and it can be overshadowed by sensitivities over things like race and different cultures, and an intolerance of new people coming in. So when we look at economics, we need to put that to one side. We need to look at the economic analysis, and there are some widely circulated fears about lower wages and unemployment. But when we look at the bigger picture, there's more to it than a simple increase in supply of labour. There's also the higher demand, higher economic growth, higher productivity that may occur from immigration.